Okinawa, April 1945. Private First Class Daniel Webster lay motionless in a muddy shell crater, his eye pressed against a rifle scope that hadn't moved in 3 hours. Around him, Able Company was pinned down. 4 Marines had been shot in the last hour alone. Clean headshots, professional kills. The Japanese sniper, or snipers, were somewhere in the tree line 400 yards ahead, and nobody could find them. The lieutenant had called for artillery, mortars, air support, flamethrowers, every big weapon in the American arsenal. But Webster had asked for something else. He asked to go alone. He carried a bolt-action rifle that looked like something his grandfather might have used in the First World War, while every other Marine carried a semi-automatic M1 Garand that could fire 8 rounds as fast as you could pull the trigger. Webster lugged around a rifle that required him to manually work the bolt after every single shot. The other Marines called it his toy, his antique, his museum piece. "What are you going to do with that thing, Webster? Bore them to death?" But Webster wasn't laughing. He was hunting. Over the next 6 hours, he would crawl through 400 yards of the most dangerous terrain on Okinawa. He would locate 11 hidden Japanese snipers, and he would kill every single one of them, one shot at a time. To understand what Webster faced, you need to understand what Japanese snipers did to American Marines in the Pacific. They were ghosts. Unlike their German counterparts in Europe, who operated in pairs, used established positions, and followed predictable doctrines, Japanese snipers were chaos incarnate. They hid in trees, in caves, in spider holes, in the bodies of their own dead. They tied themselves to branches so they wouldn't fall if killed. They covered themselves in mud and vegetation until they became part of the jungle itself, and they were patient. A Japanese sniper would wait hours, sometimes days, for a single shot. They didn't spray bullets. They didn't reveal their position with unnecessary fire. They waited until an officer raised binoculars, until a radio man set up his antenna, until a medic rushed to help a wounded Marine. Then they fired once and vanished. The psychological effect was devastating. Marines couldn't move, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every shadow became a threat. Every rustle of leaves became a potential death sentence. At Guadalcanal, Japanese snipers had held up entire battalions. At Peleliu, they turned the advance into a crawl. At Iwo Jima, they killed Marines from positions that seemed impossible to locate. Now on Okinawa, the nightmare continued. Able Company had advanced into a valley ringed by low hills covered in scrub brush and shattered trees. It looked empty. It felt wrong. The first shot killed Corporal Martinez. Clean hit through the helmet. The second shot killed the Marine who tried to drag Martinez to cover. The third shot wounded the lieutenant in the shoulder. Nobody could see where the fire was coming from. The shots echoed off the hills, making direction impossible to determine. The Japanese were using smokeless powder. No muzzle flash to spot. They were ghosts, killing from the shadows. That's when Webster asked permission to go hunting. Daniel Webster's weapon was the M1903A4 Springfield. To understand why Marines mocked it, you need to understand what had happened to infantry rifles in World War II. The M1903 Springfield was a bolt-action rifle. It had been the standard American infantry weapon since 1903, hence the name. It was accurate, reliable, and powerful. It had served in World War I and the early years of World War II. But in 1936, the U.S. Army adopted the M1 Garand. The Garand was semi-automatic. Pull the trigger and it fired. Pull again, it fired again. No working the bolt, no manual cycling, 8 rounds as fast as your finger could move. In combat, this was a massive advantage. A Marine with a Garand could put 8 aimed shots downrange in the time it took a bolt-action shooter to fire 3. By 1945, the Garand was the standard. It was the symbol of American firepower. It was what real Marines carried. The Springfield. That was for old men and rear echelon troops. But Webster saw something that the other Marines missed. The Springfield was more accurate than the Garand, not by much in standard configuration, but the A4 variant that Webster carried was different. It came from the factory with a mounting system for a Weaver 330C scope, 2.75x magnification, enough to turn a man-sized target at 600 yards into a clear, precise aiming point. The Garand couldn't mount a scope effectively. Its design ejected the clip upward, right where a scope would need to be. Various attempts to create a scoped Garand had failed or proved awkward. So if you wanted precision, if you needed to hit a specific target at long range, you used the old bolt action, but more importantly, Webster understood something about sniper warfare that raw firepower couldn't solve. Finding the sniper was harder than killing him. What good was 8 fast rounds if you didn't know where to aim? The Japanese weren't going to stand up and wave. They weren't going to engage in a firefight. They fired once and disappeared. To beat a sniper, you had to think like a sniper. You had to be slow, patient, methodical. You had to read the terrain the way they read it, find the positions they would choose, watch the shadows they would hide in. You didn't need a fast rifle for that. You needed the right rifle and the discipline to use it. Here's what nobody tells you about counter-sniper operations. It's not about being a better shot. It's about being a better hunter. The Marines with their Garands were trying to win a firefight against an enemy that refused to fight. They were spraying bullets into empty jungle, hoping to hit something. Webster understood that this was a different kind of war. One man against another, brain against brain, patience against patience. And he was about to prove that sometimes the oldest tools are the deadliest. Webster slipped out of the Marine perimeter at 600 hours. He carried his Springfield 40 rounds of match-grade ammunition, a canteen, and a Ka-bar knife. No pack, no helmet, just a soft cap that wouldn't reflect light. He had smeared mud on his face, his hands, every exposed piece of skin. He moved slowly, agonizingly slowly. A Marine assault would have covered the 400 yards to the tree line in minutes. Webster would take 3 hours. Every movement was calculated. He never rose above the height of the grass. He never created a silhouette against the sky. He never moved in a straight line that might catch a watcher's eye. He was looking for 2 things: signs of the enemy and the positions they would choose. Japanese snipers followed patterns. They preferred elevated positions with clear fields of fire. They liked positions with multiple escape routes. They chose spots where the natural terrain would disguise their movement. Webster had spent months studying these tendencies. He had examined captured documents. He had interviewed Marines who had survived sniper attacks. He had learned to think like his enemy. Now he put that knowledge to work. By Oro 800, he had reached the base of the first hill. He lay in a shallow depression, scanning the tree line with his scope. Nothing moved. The jungle was silent, but Webster wasn't looking for movement. He was looking for mistakes. A branch bent at the wrong angle. Vegetation that was slightly off color, indicating it had been cut and placed as camouflage. A shadow that was too dark, too regular, too shaped like a human form. He found the first one. It was barely visible, just the faintest outline of a shoulder behind a fallen log, maybe. 150 yards up the slope, the Japanese sniper had covered himself with branches and leaves. He was nearly invisible, but his position was wrong. The log he hid behind was oriented perfectly for watching the Marine perimeter below. It was exactly where Webster would have positioned himself. Webster didn't fire immediately. He watched, waited, counted his own heartbeats to keep time. The Japanese sniper was patient. He didn't move for 15 minutes, but eventually he did. A slight shift of weight, a small adjustment of his rifle, confirmation. Webster aligned his crosshairs, center mass. He controlled his breathing, letting his heart rate slow. He squeezed the trigger the way his instructors had taught him. Steady pressure, no jerk, letting the shot surprise him. The Springfield cracked. The shape behind the log went still in a different way. The stillness of death. One down. Webster worked the bolt. A smooth, practiced motion that took less than a second, and chambered another round. He didn't move from his position. The shot would have been heard, but the Japanese wouldn't know where it came from. Not yet. If he moved now, he might give himself away. He waited another 20 minutes, then he began to crawl again. The second sniper was harder to find. This one wasn't on the ground. He was in a tree, tied to the trunk with rope so he could fire without worrying about his balance. The tree was about 200 yards from the first kill on the same hillside. Webster spotted him by accident. A bird landed on a branch near the sniper's position and immediately flew away again. Animals knew. They could sense when something wasn't right. Webster studied the tree for 10 minutes before he was certain. The Japanese sniper was about 20 feet up, wedged into a fork between the trunk and a major branch. His rifle was resting on a smaller branch, perfectly positioned to cover the valley below. This was a harder shot. Uphill angle, partial concealment. The target was obscured by leaves. Webster waited for the wind. When a breeze moved through the trees, the leaves shifted. For just a moment, a gap opened in the foliage. Webster fired. The sniper tumbled from the tree, his safety rope catching him for a moment before his weight tore it free. He crashed through the branches and hit the ground with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silent jungle. 2 down. By noon, Webster had killed 5 Japanese snipers. Each kill was different. One was hiding in a shell crater that had been converted into a fighting position. One was concealed behind the roots of a fallen tree. One was buried so deep in vegetation that Webster only found him by noticing the unnatural shape of the undergrowth. Each time he took a single shot, worked the bolt, waited, moved. The Marines watching from the perimeter below had no idea what was happening. They heard the occasional rifle crack, but they couldn't tell if Webster was shooting or being shot at. They could only wait and hope. By mid-afternoon, Webster was deep in the Japanese-held terrain. He was beyond support now. If he was spotted, if he was wounded, no one could reach him in time. He was alone in a way that few soldiers ever experience. But the hunting was good. The Japanese snipers had established an interlocking network of positions, each one covering the approaches to the others. It was a brilliant defensive system, but it had a weakness. The snipers were focused outward, toward the Marine lines. They weren't watching for a threat coming from within their own perimeter. Webster was inside the web now, picking off the spiders one by one. By 1600 hours, his count stood at 9. He was running low on ammunition. Only 15 rounds remained. He had killed 9 men with 25 rounds, an astonishing ratio when most infantry combat averaged thousands of rounds fired per casualty inflicted. But he had also noticed something troubling. The last 2 snipers had been positioned differently. They were set up to watch the hillside itself, not the valley below. They were looking for him. The Japanese had figured out what was happening. Webster knew the game had changed. He was no longer the hunter, he was the hunted. Somewhere in this jungle, Japanese snipers were scanning the terrain for any sign of the American who had been killing their comrades. The advantage of patience now belonged to them. They knew he was here. They would wait for him to make a mistake. Webster did something that his training hadn't taught him. He did nothing. He found a depression in the ground, barely deep enough to conceal his body, and he lay down. He covered himself with leaves and dirt. He held his rifle close, but he didn't look through the scope. He listened. For 30 minutes he lay motionless. His muscles cramped. Insects crawled across his skin, but he didn't move. And then he heard it. The faintest sound of disturbed vegetation. Footsteps moving slowly through the brush. The Japanese were hunting him on foot. They had abandoned their positions and were trying to flush him out. Webster smiled. This was a mistake. A sniper in a fixed position is incredibly difficult to locate, but a sniper who moves is a sniper who can be found. He stayed motionless as the footsteps grew closer. He could hear 2 distinct sets now. 2 men moving through the jungle, maybe 50 yards apart, sweeping toward his position. They were being careful, but they weren't careful enough. Webster waited until the first one was almost on top of him. The Japanese soldier was looking up, scanning the trees, when Webster rose from the ground like a ghost. The sniper's eyes widened. Webster's first shot hit him in the chest from 5 feet away. The man was dead before he understood what had happened. The second Japanese sniper heard the shot and spun toward the sound. He was fast. His rifle was coming up even as he turned. But Webster was already working the bolt. The smooth action chambered a new round in less than a second. He fired from the hip, not a textbook shot, not a clean shot. But at 40 yards it didn't need to be. The Japanese sniper fell. 11 down, all 11. Webster stood in the jungle, breathing hard, his hands shaking for the first time all day. Then he began the long walk back to friendly lines. When Webster emerged from the tree line, the Marines almost shot him. He was covered in mud and leaves. He walked with the slow, exhausted gait of a man who had pushed himself far beyond normal limits. He looked more like a creature from a nightmare than an American serviceman. But then they recognized the rifle, the toy, the antique. Word spread through the company in minutes. Webster got 11 of them. 11? By himself? With that old bolt-action piece of junk. The Marines who had mocked his rifle stared at him as he walked past. Nobody made jokes now. Nobody called the Springfield a toy. The lieutenant, his arm in a sling from the wound he'd taken that morning, met Webster at the command post. "How?" he asked. Webster's answer was the same answer that every successful sniper in history has given. "I didn't try to outshoot them. I outthought them." The M1903A4 Springfield remained in service as the primary American sniper rifle through the end of World War II. It served in Korea. It served in the early years of Vietnam. It was only replaced when more modern designs, purpose-built sniper rifles with improved optics and ergonomics, finally caught up to what the old bolt action had always offered. But the lesson Daniel Webster taught on that Okinawa hillside never went out of style. Firepower doesn't win sniper duels. Patience does. Intelligence does. The willingness to slow down while everyone else is trying to go faster. That's what separates the hunters from the hunted. The Marines who carried M1 Garands weren't wrong about their rifles. The Garand was the greatest infantry rifle of its generation, but it was an infantry rifle, designed for infantry combat. Webster's Springfield was something else. It was a precision instrument, a surgeon's scalpel in a world of sledgehammers. The men who mocked it didn't understand what it was for. After Okinawa, they understood. Sometimes the weapon that looks obsolete is the weapon that saves the day. Sometimes the soldier who moves slowest sees the most. And sometimes the man with the toy is the most dangerous person on the battlefield. Daniel Webster finished the war with 17 confirmed sniper kills. He never received the fame of some other Marine snipers. His name isn't in most history books. His story was classified for decades as part of intelligence on Japanese sniper tactics. But the Marines who served with him never forgot. They remembered the day an entire company was paralyzed by invisible killers. They remembered the man who asked to go alone. They remembered the sound of that old bolt-action rifle firing once every few minutes, methodically clearing a hillside that artillery couldn't touch. The experts said the Springfield was outdated. The brass said semi-automatic was the future. The other Marines said Webster was crazy for carrying an antique into modern combat. The 11 Japanese snipers who died that day had no comment, because in the end it doesn't matter what the experts say. It matters what works. And one man with the right rifle, the right training, and the right mindset proved more valuable than an entire company with weapons everyone said were better. That's the lesson of the toy rifle. That's the lesson of the Pacific. That's the lesson of war. If this story of patience, precision, and proving the doubters wrong resonated with you, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel covers the forgotten, covers stories of World War II. The ones they didn't teach you in school. The ones that show what really happened when the bullets started flying. Tap the bell so you never miss an upload, and drop a comment below. I want to know, would you have trusted the old bolt action, or would you have grabbed a Garand like everyone else? Share this video with someone who appreciates real military history, and check out the video on screen right now for another story of overlooked warriors and underestimated weapons. I'll see you in the next one.